As we move further and further through 2024, I see many people asking the question, what is the next Baldur's Gate 3 going to be? Now, this one is tricky because the issue with Baldur's Gate, and I've said this before, is no one predicted this game's success. And so it means that most of the AAA games that have been in development in the RPG space, they're simply not going to be influenced by Baldur's Gate 3, unfortunately. These are games like Avowed, Dragon Age 4, if it's one you've got your eye on. These sorts of games, they probably won't have much Baldur's Gate influence outside of the marketing, where the marketing sales teams try and pretend that, oh, this could be the next game you'll love if you enjoyed Baldur's Gate. There will be plenty of that, but sadly something like Avowed, it was pitched and it was originally produced in an age where most of the publishers thought CRPGs were super niche and no one was going to be interested. So most of these are going to be more action-focused titles, which is okay. I like games like Elden Ring too, but I also love my CRPGs very much. And so I'm always on the lookout for what's next. What are the next great CRPGs going to be? And I'm going to share some of the ones I found with you today. Games that are either out now, maybe in early access, but haven't had an official release, and other ones coming soon as well. The first one I'm going to mention, I have actually shared this before. It's called Arcanum, I believe, and it's very interesting. It's an open world title that mixes first person, kind of like the Elder Scrolls, with a top-down, turn-based battle system as well. So you still control a whole party, even though you can do that first-person exploration. And I know I've spoken about it before, however, I mentioned it before it had came out, and I wanted to give you an update, because I was optimistic about the game, but since release, word of mouth has been extremely positive, which is nice to hear. I had no idea if this was going to be good when I first mentioned it, so I was kind of crossing my fingers. Please don't embarrass me. Please don't be a pile of garbage. But the good news is, it seems to be very good. I have purchased it, I have dabbled, and everything I've seen and played so far looks great. I don't tend to go all the way through early access because I like to see the official release and kind of be wowed when it comes out and you see everything finished. I mean, with Baldur's Gate 3, I played early access 2 or 3 years ago, and while it was nice, I kind of wish I had played it when it came out last year and experienced all that content for the first time with everyone else. But I still like that early access is a thing. It allows people to go through, give their feedback, so I appreciate that people do that. So Arcanum, it's 90% on Steam, positive reviews. The only negative ones seem to say obvious stuff, like the game is unfinished. And it's likely going to be massive when it is actually finished, because even early access is something like 10 hours worth of content. It's pretty meaty for something that is made by, I believe, a solo dev. Pretty incredible that one person is doing it. Now, this is the world map of the game, and apparently this red square is early access. And again, that is like 10 hours worth of content. So the entire game, this could end up being a sprawling world of hundreds of hours. Maybe too ambitious for one person. Hopefully this guy gets some help. Hopefully the scale is something he keeps in mind. He doesn't bite off more than he can chew. But so far, so good. You've got a playable game. It needs work. But at least what's in our hands now appears to be good. So that's kind of a win so far for 2024. And the next one I want to mention, I have not talked about this or any of the other ones, I believe, before. This is Knight's Path, the tournament. It's a medieval RPG with challenging action combat, so not really a CRPG, but I think it is going to have a lot of CRPG influence, so I feel it is worth mentioning. Now, this trailer, it kind of shows off the combat system, because Knight's Path, the tournament, it's actually a free demo, essentially. It's 2 or 3 hours. And it's meant to be the prologue to a full game, which is going to be an open world RPG that is supposedly a mixture of Gothic and open world RPG series from the early 2000s. It's fantastic. It's kind of why I got excited, because those games are so good. It's going to be a mix of Gothic and also Sekiro, the From Software title. Now, I imagine when they say Sekiro, that is about the combat. That's where that influence lies. And so I haven't actually played this through yet. I'm probably going to wait maybe until they make some progress with the full game that they're making. But most of the feedback is extremely positive about the combat, which is interesting because Sekiro, it's got a really nice combat system. It is super smooth. To replicate that in an indie title, or at least do it their way, that is impressive given the feedback has been so positive. So if you do have any interest at all, it's totally free. You can check it out and you can kind of know that they are going to be working on a full game, an open world RPG. So pretty impressive that they can actually show us something now that gives them some credibility when they talk about the full game that is supposedly coming. Now, this one's really interesting, Dread Delusion. I'm surprised I hadn't heard about this one before because I really like sometimes the early kind of 3D era games like PS1 graphics, essentially, you know, PS1 Harry Potter, Hagrid, Malfoy, all those memes and things that you see. But these graphics kind of like that Morrowind vibe, and that is also how they've described the game, that it's going to be a bit like Morrowind. Now, I can talk about this, but it's kind of hard to explain, so I'm going to show you. We'll have a bit of a look here. Now, just to give some quick context, this has been in early access for, I believe, a couple of years, which is why I was surprised I hadn't seen it before. This trailer is for a brand new update that I believe came out in the last couple of days, so kind of brand new. Again, it's early access, so the full product isn't out. So what you see here, it might not be reflective of the entire game. Anything around the clockwork, this sort of stuff is purely around this update. But the aesthetic of the game, it does remind me of Morrowind, because even though that's a fantasy title, it's quite unique in the fantasy space. If you've played all or some of the Elder Scrolls games, you might kind of see the trend where after Morrowind, they became more like generic fantasy, probably because Bethesda saw that as being more accessible. But Morrowind, it's really unique. The Elder Scrolls itself used to be much more than generic fantasy, at least in terms of what we saw most of the time in games. So it's a shame to see that go away, whereas Dread Delusion seems to bring that back. It just feels really creative, and everything I've seen has been quite intriguing. Got these enemies, I assume, so again, it's first-person, Morrowind style. I kind of get a Thief vibe as well, if you know the Thief Dark Project in the Metal Age. This whole clockwork stuff kind of reminds me of the second game in particular, so that's kind of interesting. So we've got more enemies, it looks like. They're pretty well done. Looks like when you cast spells, you pull out the book. That's a potion. So it is intriguing, and just to jump back to the Steam page so you can see some screenshots as well. Again, that Morrowind influence. I will say this, I was super excited when I first saw it, especially because it has nearly 1,000 reviews, 92+% of which are positive. Now, sadly, I wouldn't get too overexcited, because even though it describes itself as an open world RPG, it's got the Morrowind influence. When I looked it up, it seems like it's not really a full-fledged RPG. It's probably more an action-adventure with some RPG elements. That's okay if you like what you see and you're not sort of turned off by the fact that it's not really a full-on CRPG. It still might do something for you. I may still check this out regardless, because people are still saying it's quite good. It's just the RPG influence might not be as strong as you might first expect, or at least you hope, given it kind of looks like a Morrowind-like. So pretty impressive nonetheless. If it sort of captures your attention and you want to see more, I think they've done a decent job there. It looks like we've got a town there in that trailer we see in the background as well. So pretty cool. But I want to move on to this one, Worldstone Chronicles. It used to go by another name, Journey from the Crown. I'd say if we're talking presentation, that last game we saw, that was big on presentation, even though the graphics maybe weren't 2024 standard, they were going for the retro style, you're still sort of gripped visually. Whereas this one, probably not exactly a visual showcase. And I saw this, it looks like it's a party-based CRPG, it's that traditional style. But I'm going to jump into the trailer because I haven't really seen this before, so it could be interesting. And again, it's got the old name in the trailer. That has since changed, and I'll put that in the description. So yeah, 100% party-based. We can see 5 characters here. And we could see that it's probably not going to be some sort of unique changing the landscape RPG, which is totally fine. I think people just want more of that Baldur's Gate style. That's all they really want. They don't need to shake everything up, especially when it's an indie game where it is more about, hey, if you can make a complete game that's quality, I think if you're a small team, you've done your job there. You don't have to change the whole landscape. We can kind of see some standard stuff. It's probably not one, again, it's not going to change the game, but if they can just make a well-made CRPG, I'm going to be interested. I'm likely going to support it. It seems like it's been in development for some time. We can see some screenshots here, and I guess when you don't go for an art style that's timeless, it's probably when it's easier to see that the lower budget is kind of there. It's not a tens of millions dollar budgeted game. It's made by a small team who put, I assume, these assets together, probably not even professional artists necessarily. And if we look at some features here, they mention that it's a single-player, team-based, story-driven open-world adventure game using multiple characters without the need to pause in combat. Now, I probably wasn't watching the trailer closely enough, because apparently it is not turn-based. It is an action-based combat system. Brings interesting and new ways to manage your team in a fun way. Journey for the Crown brings a lengthy choose-your-own-adventure dialogue system with over 250 zones to explore, countless hours of quests, adventure, and treasures to discover, and that's just got me thinking about Baldur's Gate 3 likes and thinking about similar games. It must be quite difficult for these developers to make CRPGs that are turn-based, because Baldur's Gate 3 obviously uses the Dungeons & Dragons system, so a lot of that is already there. That's had years of refinement. I know not everyone necessarily agrees on which edition is best, but you've got a pre-made combat system. That is pretty good. To be fair, Larian have done it before with Divinity, so it's not as if the game is only good because they had the D&D systems. But if you think about an indie dev who has to come up with their own in-depth system that works in turn-based, it works in sort of that open world. It's not like a Pokemon or a Final Fantasy VII, the old one I mean, where it's turn-based but it's all static. You've got to use environments and things like that. To do that as an indie dev would be quite hard. So I can understand why not all of these older style CRPGs, why they're not turn-based and they maybe go for an action combat system. It makes sense, probably less complex, probably not as hard to develop. So that's okay. Not everything has to be like Baldur's Gate 3 in every possible way. But if it can give us some of the same feelings, that would be nice. This probably isn't in my top 10 games I'm most excited for by any means. But if they can just pull off a solid computer role-playing game, I'll be happy with that. Now, I mentioned presentation. If you want to talk about a game that will just grip you, this is one of those. It may not be for everyone, but when I saw this, I was absolutely blown away. I think someone linked this to me a little while ago, but now it's got its own Steam page, and it looks incredible. We'll have a look at this one. We can see the UI there. Now, I didn't even want to sort of interrupt that because it's super intriguing, and just the style of the game, it's very different. It seems to have that horror kind of aesthetic. It's not just your typical fantasy or something like that. It's very unique. I mean, it's probably got a little bit of Fallout in there, perhaps a little bit of System Shock. It seems like it's an abandoned facility or something and you're in there. I'm just guessing. But I mean, we can see the interface here, for instance. It's kind of that dungeon crawler vibe. I think the dev might have even described it as a dungeon crawler. The combat itself, not sure if it's action-based or if it's turn-based, but he also mentioned it is a computer role-playing game. So I imagine there's going to be plenty of RPG mechanics in this. I'm super excited. It says it's coming next year. You might have noticed very early on, we'll just jump back to that, from the creator of Primordia, which is a great point-and-click adventure. I think this guy made another game, I think Strange Lands or something. Haven't got around to that yet, but this is a competent dev. Primordia was great. This game is in somewhat of a similar style, but way more horror from what I'm seeing. The visuals are incredible. Older sort of style, but I think that suits this horror vibe to make you just sort of feel alone, it's scary, or anything could possibly happen. So I'm pumped for this. It's a while away, of course, but I hope the dev takes their time, and I hope this works out because it looks really, really cool. I'm going to jump through a few just really quickly now. I won't spend heaps of time on them, but I'll put these all in the description that are coming up here, and some of them might be interesting to different people. So Code of the Savage, it's influenced by the Ultima titles, old school RPGs, mainly from sort of the 80s and 90s, and these sort of look more like, say, an Ultima 7, for instance. The Ultima games, they were released in such a time period. Some of them are like MS-DOS, really, really old, and then some of them look a little bit more modern, like you can see here in these screenshots. Now, I believe it was originally tile-based. You couldn't just sort of move everywhere in combat, but I think that has changed. It's now just a seamless open-world game where you can explore, and it's going to have all the Western RPG influence that you'd expect. NPCs, choice-making, exploration. Looks pretty cool. So that one, it's Code of the Savage. This one is the Tainted Lands. I haven't seen it talked about really anywhere. And it's a Korean developer, but it seems to be a Western influence rather than maybe some of the Asian RPGs that are out there, JRPGs and so on. The art looks really, really nice, I think. Now, when I zoom in, it's hard to tell, does this look incredible or does it look like a mobile game? I'm 50-50. When I zoomed out, I thought it actually looked better than when I zoomed in. So we'll have to see what it looks like live. There doesn't seem to be actual trailers. It is a small independent studio. There's some Korean publishers, for instance. There's some not so great ones out there that are focused on like gacha games, microtransactions, but this is an indie team, so it hopefully means that they're focused on great things. And the art, I would say, the enemy mobs and things, they do look good. I just hope in motion it looks good and it doesn't sort of feel like a mobile game. So just one I wanted to mention quickly. It's probably not going to come out anytime soon. Has been tagged as a CRPG. I'm not sure if that's the developer doing it, but we will have to see. Looks solid enough. This one is Dustgrave, a Sandbox RPG, and when I looked at the trailers and when I looked at some screenshots, I had kind of mixed feelings. It's got a pretty cartoony art style, and I guess it's more unique than some of the CRPG art styles out there, but what intrigued me, I suppose, the most is if we look at the features. The trailer didn't really show a lot, so I won't show that, but the features sounded decent. An advanced character editor allows you to customize your digital alter ego freely. Everything meaningful happening in the world is recorded. NPCs will judge your good and bad deeds based on their personality or faction. You may be a killer, despised by common folk, but killing heretics could kickstart your career in the clergy. The world, now this one certainly intrigued me, the world is in constant evolution. Factions will constantly fight against each other, pillaging and conquering settlements. Some may acquire more power and become major players in the area. Others may be destroyed forever. So they're really pushing that sandbox vibe. Again, the game is called Dustgrave, a sandbox RPG. So it's all about that sandpit that you're in. And it really seems to me like they might be going for something where the world keeps changing around you, even if you're not there. So factions are interacting. things are happening in different places, even if you're off doing something else. It's not purely about the decisions that you make. It may be even about decisions you don't make. If you don't go somewhere, maybe early enough, something happens there. And in another playthrough, if you go there, things could be slightly different. So that to me intrigues me, much more intriguing than just looking at the trailer, which again didn't show a lot, just sort of your characters walking around. There wasn't a lot of interesting quest design I saw, but they claim to be doing that. There's going to be a lot going on with the sandbox. NPCs have unique personalities and desires, and their daily life is thoroughly simulated. Use this to your advantage to get interesting quests and juicy rewards, or simply wait for them to go to work, break inside their house and steal everything. So it sounds like there's going to be genuine NPC schedules, they've got jobs, they do follow that path, which is really nice to see. We talk about that in games like Oblivion, where it gets clowned on a bit, but when it's done right, it can be really cool. They mentioned some other stuff as well, a stealth system, turn-based combat, which is nice to see as well. So I think this one, maybe if you judge it on its looks, it maybe doesn't seem sort of all that special, but it seems like there's some ambition here, there's hopefully some talent, and they can hopefully deliver on their promises. This seems like a very different one. It won't play like purely a Baldur's Gate, at least apart from the combat, which is turn-based. It is going to be more of that sandbox. So it's intriguing. There's a lot of games like this out there as well, so I've shown a few here that I haven't shown off in the past. There's other videos I've made where I've talked about other indie RPGs, and there's plenty out there. It's worth checking it out. It's worth not purely getting excited about, say, Unavowed, which is a AAA game, but I don't think it's going to be anywhere near as ambitious or as fulfilling as some of the indie games that we've seen. So again, I like getting excited about some mainstream games as well, when it's got a big budget, a big team behind it. You know, maybe this game could be the ambitious one that maybe moves RPGs forwards. I like to get pumped about that sometimes, but if we're purely honest, usually it's coping. Usually the mainstream games, it feels like the devs have hands tied behind their back, because they've got to make something that's accessible to everyone, that's going to move millions and millions of copies. Whereas these indie games, they're made by passionate people. The tools seem to be out there that make this accessible to develop these sorts of games. So I appreciate the small-time devs who are probably doing this along with their full-time jobs as well. They're probably not making a living for the most part with this, even if they're getting a bit of support by early access or Patreon or whatever it is. These guys are great. I really appreciate it. So if you see games that you like, it's worth supporting them, and hopefully we get some good ones in 2024. Thanks so much for listening. I'll see you on the next one. Cheers. Bye.